Wow, the amount of times that Toby's cat pass has surprised out me is probably in the thousands.
Toby's cat passes are good for 3 reasons: his body proportions, his spine shape, and what he does with his hips. The body proportions one, you can't really change. If you're a tall guy and you want to win a gold medal at the Olympics in men's floor, I have bad news for you, it's just not going to happen. The easiest way to explain why is if you just get 2 sticks, a little short one and a long one, and you flip them with your fingers, which one spins faster? The little one. And the same is true for parkour and freerunning. If you're a short guy, you do better at freerunning because it's easier to rotate when you're short. For cat passes, what you're really looking for is a short legs for one, and 2, a kind of muscle distribution where you're shaped like an inverted triangle. All of your meat is at the top half of you, big shoulder blades, big muscles on those shoulder blades. Basically, the ability to push really well and get your legs out of the way.
In this clip here, if you can imagine Toby's legs being a couple of inches longer, he can no longer have the same advantageous takeoff angle.
Anyway, you can't really change it, so it's not relevant. The things that are relevant are spine position and hip position, because you can do something about these. So the way Toby runs is very distinctive, and the first thing I want to look at is the spine and the shape that he's making with it. So you kind of got the upper bit of your spine, thoracic spine. Now in the thoracic spine, what Toby's doing is that his very low thoracic spine, he's moving forward a lot. And this is getting his center of gravity really far forward. And this forward center of gravity is what allows you to do it fast, which is really useful for a cat pass. But he's also, in his upper thoracic spine, starting to lift up again, go into extension. So it's a combination of flexion low in the spine and extension high in the spine. And this combination is really difficult to do. If you try and do this, what you'll find is that it's probably easy to start the flexion, but not from as low as Toby has started it and not as much as Toby does. And then the rest of you will probably continue to curve. And so if you take this shape into a cat pass, it won't work as well as Toby's, because what Toby's does is when he's straightening up again, what it does is it allows his rib cage to open up at the top again. And with that really open rib cage, it means that his shoulder blades can move very well and easily around that and get a really good pushing action. If he continued to round down through the head, not only when he ran would he start to fall forward, he wouldn't be able to come up again, his kind of momentum would take him more down to the ground, but his rib cage would get compressed, all the upper ribs would come in together, and the shoulders would lose their ability to generate a full range of motion and thus a powerful push. So this combination of round, getting a center of gravity very far forward, but then upright, both allowing him not to crash into the ground, but to use his shoulder blades really well to push, is an unusual combination of shapes. And if you try and do this, you'll find that your abdominals probably aren't able to support that position. They have to work very hard in the middle level, and in your upper spine and your back, your thoracic extensors, the muscles that run along the upper back of your spine, probably aren't strong enough or just functional enough to lift you up out of this position. But this shape also has disadvantages. People tend to make the same shape in every situation, whether or not it's appropriate, and I'll cover that a little more at the end. Toby's hips. Now to do this, we need to look at a little more anatomy. So the things we need to understand are leg, pelvis, spine, and the muscles that kind of connect these together, or at least the ones we're going to focus on. So the one at the front that goes from the leg to the spine is called your hip flexor. And this muscle basically lifts your legs up or pulls your torso down, depending. And the other one is your glutes. It goes from the back of your leg up onto your pelvis. And this basically lifts your leg up behind you. So it's hip extension and hip flexion when the leg comes in front of you. Now this basically determines how useful your legs are when you're running. If your legs can go a really long way behind you when you're running, they can generate power all the way through the step. If your legs get stuck, as in the muscle on the front is tight and the leg cannot travel back, you cannot generate power and force all the way through your step. And it also forces you to keep your center of gravity relatively far back. Now Toby is really good at this. He has really strong glutes and really strong abdominals and quite mobile hip flexors. And what this allows him to do is to generate a lot of speed. And somewhat counterintuitively, when he's doing a run up, he'll actually take less steps than other people as he accelerates faster. So you can look at this run up here to a jump that Storror did in LA. And sorry, Drew takes 2 to 3 more steps in the same space than Toby takes in the same run-up, even though Toby goes faster. You can see this in the speed competitions. Toby wins the races but takes less steps because each of his steps is that much more functional. And this isn't just isolated to Toby's parkour life. When you see Toby standing around doing whatever he's doing in daily life, his hips sit very square and flat. What that means is that his hip flexors are not tight ever, and he's sitting with his pelvis quite underneath him, and his glutes are working to help him support that position. If we look at Drew, you can see that when Drew stands around, we see much more curvature in his spine, and that curvature is because, and his hips are tilted further forward as well, and that curvature and hip tilt is as a result of his hip flexor muscles pulling him passively into a bit of flexion. And you may have heard this referred to as anterior pelvic tilt. And this is something that many people have, and it's very, very common. So if you want to be like Toby and have really big jumps, you need to challenge that tightness in your hip flexors and work on the strength of your glutes. And I think the best way to do that is in daily life. Have a look at how you stand and walk. Do you ever challenge the tightness on the front of your hips? When you stand, how rocked forward is your pelvis? Because these things, I think, make the biggest long-term effect to how functional we move in parkour. But downsides. Body proportions can also come with limitations. If you have very wide shoulders, it actually can make it a lot more difficult to stabilize your torso. So someone like Benj, who has narrower shoulders relative to his hips, this might make it harder for him to do powerful cat passes, but it will make it easier for him to balance himself in strides. So Toby, I think, will often struggle with really complex technical stride lines because he's struggling to balance that heavy weight on the top of his body. Similarly, Toby's love for a curved thoracic position is not as functional in other contexts. It's appropriate when it's appropriate. In a cat pass, wonderful. If you're trying to stick a jump, not so good. The curvature in his spine is going to take his center of gravity too far forward. The curvature as well is not really appropriate for plyos. It works okay because Toby's got great hip power, but the fact that his spine never stacks up straight on top of each other really limits his ability to generate power properly in this movement. And it's really going to cause him problems as well if he tries to do big downwards plyos or if he's careless. I think it's going to be very easy for him to herniate a disc because of the way the forces are being distributed. So anyway, that's this week's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you want analysed next week. Maybe why Josh hates running prees or why Benj and Max jump off different feet. Interested to hear your thoughts. Peace out.